As a business owner, if you ever want to free yourself up from a busy schedule so you actually have time to live the life you always wanted, having the right team is crucial for this. If you don't have the right team, you end up working in your business a lot of time. If you have a team but not the right team, you end up spending even more time to manage them and still not get the things done the way you want it or the way the business needs to be. But how exactly do you find the right team? How do you pay them? How do you decide what needs to be delegated or not? Those are the tough questions that every business owner asks himself. In this video, I invite a good friend of mine, Adrian Lloyd. Adrian spent more than 20 years as an executive in the healthcare system in charge of hiring people. Today, she's spending time running her very own successful coaching and consulting firm. In her entire career, she has hired more than 500 people, anywhere from part-time contractor to a high-level executive. She has a lot of experience on hiring people. Let's tap into her thought and 20 years of experience on how to hire the right person, when to delegate, how to pay them, and many other tough questions on how to find the right people. Let's jump right in. When you had to make the hiring decision, like compared to the hiring decision you have to make today for yourself, what's the difference between the two?
Yeah, so I mean, hiring for an organization or even helping my clients hire. I mean, I think when it was, being part of an organization, we were obviously looking at a lot of the same factors, of like, okay, what does this job need to look like? But oftentimes we were really just most often we were replacing what we had. If somebody left, you're kind of just replacing that position. Sometimes you're looking at, okay, we have a gap. What does that position need to be called? What's the level? Having worked in such large systems, there were obviously a lot of hoops and, processes in place, some great that provided some structure, and some not so great, and that it really felt like from a manager, leader perspective, it could really slow you down. So I think that was a significant difference, kind of being in a large system, is having anything from just the overall position levels, those salaries, all those things already to some degree kind of solidified for you. As an entrepreneur, I now have 7 people as part of my team, partly with your help, Joe, of course. And so they're not all full time. I've got some contractors that are working with me, but as an entrepreneur, really trying to figure out, where I work best, what I do really well, what I like to do, what I don't like to do, and what other people are better at. And then from there, really figuring out what does that job look like. And also, of course, the budget. I mean, not that I was concerned about the budget, of course, too, when I was in a big organization, but I think it's different where in a larger organization, I felt like there was consistent stability around cash flow, and we could really estimate volumes and projections a little bit more predictably than as an entrepreneur. It's, there's some really great months and then some other months where, it might be a little slower. And so it can be easy as an entrepreneur, I think, to feel scared and like constricted when you have those slower times. And then also, but those are the times that you've really got to be thinking about what you need for those times when you are busy, because if you don't have people in place, then when it gets really busy, you're not going to be able to take that extra contract, or you're not going to be able to, pursue that extra like revenue stream and so really thinking ahead about what you might need, but then starting to kind of plan from there. So
Yeah, I love that. Thank you for sharing that. I love that you're saying that planning ahead. That's kind of like the key, right? When it comes to hiring. So what I want to point out is what Adrian do so different, especially for myself, is I took me a while to have a business to start hiring. And you start to hiring pretty early on. Like, tell me about it. Like how'd you make the decision? Like before, you have very solid revenue coming in, right? You already start hiring pretty early on. Like, what gone through your mind that, okay, you knew that, okay, I need to do that?
Yeah. Well, I think for me, having been like in leadership roles for 20 years there, as I worked kind of from like the manager to director to administrator to kind of CEO level, along the way, I had to get better at delegating. And it's something I still struggle with because I like things done how I like them done. And it's hard to let go. But when going into the entrepreneur space, like I knew there's a ton I don't know, still I don't know. But I knew early on that I really like to have a thought partner too in some of it. So I really wanted somebody who could help partner with me to kind of see my vision, but also to help with, when I first started, I was doing a lot of speaking engagements, a lot of presentation development work. Then it was kind of moving into proposals. and putting some of those pieces together. But a lot of that work, I needed to provide content and oversight to, but I didn't need to do all of the details. And so being able to say like, okay, where can I really add value? Because I didn't have a lot of time to spend when I first started. And I was trying to kind of, maintain my current, role and start the business as well. And so I knew I needed to have somebody that could help me do those things. And then, and she's been great. So she, that person's been with me a little over 3 years in a part-time capacity. But then I was able to kind of move and hire my first virtual assistant who was full-time with us, who helped with a variety of things. She took over some of the stuff the other person had been doing to really, the formatting and presentation content and all that stuff. And then she's also helped with branding for social media and all of these other things. As we launched our signature Day Zero Blueprint program, she was able to really make everything look consistent. And so having just starting to really think about like what I'm doing, and is it like, are those things that I enjoy doing? And sometimes it is things I enjoy doing, but I know it takes me a long time. Like I like playing with, both my parents are math teachers. I like playing with numbers, but when I'm working on financial analysis, I can go like hours and hours down a rabbit hole, and it just doesn't make sense because the client's not going to pay me for that. They're not going to pay me to spend 10 hours. So, really thinking about it from that perspective of what makes sense for me to do and how do I really get people on my team. And it's also just really nice. It's scary sometimes to feel like you're supporting financially, the other team members, but it's nice to know that you don't have to do it all yourself, and you can start to think as proposals and contracts come in, like, how do I have people work with me in different ways? So.
Yeah, you says a lot. That's awesome. So tell us a little bit, do you have how do you decide okay, I should be working on this, I should not be working on this, and how do you figure that out?
Well, sometimes with your help, but I can't say it's always a linear process. I think sometimes it's, I've often found that we all can procrastinate, and I can definitely procrastinate with some of the best of them. And so sometimes it's those things that I procrastinated on, and then I get down to the actual deadline and I'm working on it, and I'm like, oh, there's no reason that I should have been doing all of this work. But I can't, at that point, it's too late to kind of pass it off to my team member, because it wouldn't be fair to make them work in such a time crunch. And so, but those moments I think are good to then reflect on, of like, okay, looking forward, how can I break this up into little pieces so that it's not such an overwhelming task? Because I think that's one of the things that a lot of times when we procrastinate, or at least when I procrastinate, it's this something that feels huge. But if you really feel like, okay, there's maybe 4 big pieces to this, then it's like, who can help me with that?
Okay.
So I think
basically you look at the whole task, kind of like learn from your lessons, right? You see what kind of makes you like, oh my God, I gotta do this in the last minute. How do I not do it next time? And you break it down to smaller pieces. Yeah. And then from those pieces, you find out, okay, maybe someone else can do this.
Right.
And someone else will do that. So that's how you do it.
Yeah. And I think it's a learning process of so if you have a deadline, working backwards too, right? And making sure you've got enough buffer in there, both for yourself, depending what else you've got going on, or for your team members to say, like, if they're doing this piece and it's maybe the first or second time, or something's different about this project, like giving a little bit of extra buffer time so that you can review it, or being more specific with instructions. I think that's something I do really well sometimes and still could do better, is like, okay, when I can see a clear vision of how I want something to happen, like, can I give clearer instructions at the beginning versus being frustrated with the outcome and then having to provide constructive feedback, so trying to get a little better about that.
Yeah. With the management and expectation, how do you manage your staff? Right.
Right.
So what about how one of my biggest fear when I first start out to hire is I feel like I don't have enough work for them to do.
Yeah.
But how do you, do you feel that too, or how do you overcome that?
Oh yeah, I think that, and actually I just brought a couple of people on in the fall, and, I had a lot of contracts, proposals out, and of course kind of Delta hit, with COVID. And so a lot of the healthcare organizations that we were working with just kind of like everything kind of either got pushed to, we're not like the beginning of the, 2022, that just got kind of delayed. And, but I hired these people on, we spent some time with them, getting them onboarded. They went through our day zero blueprint program so they could actually understand kind of how I think and what types of things we can use as tools to help the clients. So, and I think just being open and honest with them about, this is the work that we know is coming, or this is the work that we've got out there. And I think that's what's been helpful about hiring, some independent contractors, at least at first. My goal is that we'll be able to bring them on as employees, but I think, you don't have to hire full-time right away. And actually, I think in today's market, you and I talked about, we posted those jobs and I got 300 applicants in a week. And I think people just want to work differently. So I think there's a lot of people who are exploring what their life will look like on the other side of all of this, and really want to have more flexibility. So I think it's actually a great time to look for part-time people, as long as they are the right fit and they're aligned with where you're trying to go. I think that can be great. And then that relieves some of the financial stress. I still feel stressed to try to get them work because I don't want them to leave. And I want to have them involved. But, I think having that honest conversation is the first part, but I think there's a lot of opportunities right now.
Yeah, that's great advice. Because, when I first started out, I always thought that I kind of, didn't have experience of hiring full-time people. So I thought, okay, part-time people might not be as good in quality,
right?
But you kind of said it, right? Part-time doesn't mean it's not good quality. It could be just as good, if not better, right? Because it gives them the flexibility. So yeah, I love the advice that, you don't have to necessarily hire full-time to have that financial burden,
right?
But yeah, hiring part-time doesn't mean you satisfy for lower quality as well. So that's really is one of the things that took me years to figure it out, right? Myself, and you already get it like so early on. So that's amazing. So what about, let's talk about how did you decide that, okay, that's the person? That is like, you talk about your little process on, okay, you break it down the steps. So you know who you're looking for already, right? Yeah. So how do you know that's the person? Like, what do you use? Like, do you have any tools? Like, how do you know that's the girl, that's the guy that I need to hire?
Yeah. So actually, I'm a big fan of James Wedmore. So I really liked his process for kind of hiring the first virtual assistant that I did. And he was helpful with that. And then I think I've used some of that structure going forward. So what we do is, obviously you got to clarify, what is the person going to do? You want to make the job description, it's going to be honest, but also attractive enough for somebody to click on it, right? So once you've got that in place and you're getting candidates, what we've found is beneficial, because, I had, as I mentioned, 300 people in a week apply for really 2 or 3 positions that I was trying to hire. And we're like, how are we going to go through this? So we actually asked the candidates to send us information in a separate email with like their resume and answer a couple questions. I have also used like Myers-Briggs personality assessments or other assessments. The thing with that is, like, I wouldn't use Myers-Briggs to necessarily make a hiring decision or not. And I think, I've gotten some pushback on that, but I wouldn't use it to make a hiring decision. But I think it's a conversation point if you actually do get to an interview stage with someone, to just talk to them about what they like to do, how they like to do things, because not everybody is the right fit for each role. And so I think that information is helpful, but essentially we ask candidates to send some information to a separate email address and just follow some specific instructions. And a lot of people did not take that action. So that probably weeded out, half of the candidates, if not more. And then we actually followed up with those that we looked through their materials. We thought they might be a good fit. They had some good experience based on what they'd done before. And then we asked them to actually send us a couple examples of work that was relevant to the job, so we could look at what their quality looked like and how they kind of grasped the situation. And, for me, I've got to be very careful if they're working with my healthcare clients or, physicians. Like, I want their level of, putting proposals together, or just their level of kind of knowledge of work to be similar to mine, so that I feel comfortable. Otherwise I might not use them. I'm going to hire them and not use them. So, but a lot of people, again, asking them to take that step, a lot of people weeded themselves out. And then you're able to actually look at a couple examples of the work that they sent, and that weeds a few people out. And so then you're left with about 7 or so people that we interviewed to hire too. But so kind of having that process in place, I think is helpful. And the key thing from an HR legal perspective is whatever level you're like, if you're doing something in the first round interviews, you want to be consistent, right? You want to be consistent across all the candidates. And similar.
What do you mean by that? Like,
so like if you're going to ask them for work samples, like don't
okay.
just ask a couple people, because you don't want to get into a situation where you're accused of like discriminating or anything like that. So from a big HR health system side, like those are things that we'd always be really super careful about. But even in those big systems, you can still ask for people to send in samples of work. You just have to be consistent at whatever level you're at. So maybe it's the final interview candidates you ask to do that or whatever. But I think asking people to do it early on helps save you time too, because if people aren't willing to submit information, then they're not really that interested in your job. And I know the market's tight right now and people, it's hard to find candidates, but ultimately you got to have candidates. Don't just want warm bodies. You want people that are going to be excited and invested and willing to show up. So
let's talk about money. How do you determine how much to pay them? And when do you have that conversation? Like, in what part of the hiring process that do you start talk about money? Like, do you disclose how much to pay them, like from the get-go, or when do you start the conversation? Personally, like how do you determine like each position? Because you have so many people helping you right now, right? 6, 7 of them. How do you determine which position that you pay what?
Yeah. Well, I think it's part, looking at market. So looking at similar job descriptions that are posted, I used Indeed and LinkedIn, and then I actually used, per your suggestion, hiremymom.com, where I found some great people there too. But just looking at what are those similar jobs that you're trying to hire for. And a lot of them are going to have salaries listed, like starting ranges, starting salary ranges. So I actually listed on all the jobs that we posted, we listed a salary range. Or at least a starting salary level. And so from there, then I've gotten my 20 years, I've gotten all the way down the path of, there were a couple of nurse practitioners or other managers that I've like literally been making a job offer to. And then they tell me their salary is like 20 to 30% beyond what I'm proposing. And in those big systems, like I didn't have very much power to change it. I had already been giving them like, this is where we're capped at the offer. And so I had wasted not only my time, but in some of those roles, I had wasted my physician's time because the candidate wasn't aligned on salary. So I like to bring salary to the table up front as soon as possible, because I just don't want to waste anybody's time.
Yeah.
I do want them to see the value of like, and your entrepreneur or small company, like I do want them to believe the value of, you may start here, but the company is going to continue to grow and you have the potential to grow with us. So I want them to see that. But ultimately, if they want twice what I'm able to pay or what I feel is right to pay right now, it's just not a good fit. They're going to be frustrated. And so I think he's got to bring it to the table at front, whether that's an hourly rate, a salary, or like a project-based rate. I think just having that conversation up front is very important.
What about like raise? Like how do you have the conversation of like, oh, I'm gonna give you a raise, or have they approached you like, hey, you need to give me a raise? Like, how do you handle that?
Some of both. But what I usually do is, I usually tell them up on hire that I usually look at raises around like 6 months. Sometimes I might do a little early, but usually around 6 months, just based on performance. So kind of setting that expectation that we're going to have a conversation. It makes it easier for them to bring it up and easier for me to talk about it. And I think if they bring it up, if they ask for it, I think, really it's trying to say like, okay, where is this coming from? Is it based on, other positions in the market? What are they seeing? And then you do have to look across your team. I mean, everybody's getting paid differently for their different roles, but you do want to, keep like equity in mind based on what they're doing. So I think that's important. And it's not always an exact science, unfortunately. And if, you've got one person that increases and, now you may have to make adjustments to the other members of your team. So it can get a little pricey. Sometimes.
Yeah, it's tricky too. Like for my personal experience, I had one step before for my previous company that out of the blue, she came and asked me for a raise. It was pretty significant, like 30-ish%, if I remember correctly. Yeah. Like at that moment, I'm like, I've never paid that amount for that position before. Yeah. But I like her. So I actually had to make her a deal like, is your promotion come sooner than it was supposed to be? But then you have to assume the new round of responsibility a lot sooner as well, right? Yeah. It's based on performance and responsibility as well. So that's what I want to ask you, see what you take. I I usually never really done like a systematic raise because it
Yeah.
should be based on performance. But I like the advice that, give them expectation up front, say, okay, the conversation will come in 6 months. So
Yeah.
they know something is coming and what to work on. I like
Yeah.
that.
But no, I think you're very key on when a lot of people give raises and don't change responsibilities. Like there's one thing to be like, you're doing a great job. I want to recognize the work you're doing. But when it's a very significant raise like that, I think it is important to say, okay, if you're doing that, like, are there other responsibilities that you now need to take on? But I always also like to ask the question to the team members, like, what do you like to do? And what do you not like to do? Because like my business manager right now, she's great, but she and I have a conversation a lot around, I'm giving her what I consider a lot of tasks right now that are not at her level. They're kind of just more basic administrative type stuff. And she's fine. She's like fine to do them right now, but at some point it's going to make sense for us to hire someone to help her and I both. And so just having that conversation with her about, I want you to let me know when that gets to be too much, or when you get annoyed by these things that I'm asking, because it's right. Like, I don't want her to get frustrated and not be able to talk about it. And similarly, I've had a conversation with her as well because she's aware of what other people are getting paid in the organization. And many of them are making maybe more than she is. Some of them are. And so I've had the conversation with her too, that if at some point she feels like that isn't fair or isn't, equitable, that like she comes and we could talk about it. So I, just like opening that conversation door, I think is critical. And it keeps me from feeling uncomfortable because I know some people are getting paid more than she is. And then it allows her the window to be able to ask like, hey, can we talk about this? Like, I'd like to do some of that work, or, so we can just have that conversation.
What about, like, what is your biggest fear when it comes to hiring for you right now as an entrepreneur? Like today with your own business, with your own budget, everything is on you. What's your biggest fear?
I think hiring a person who doesn't fit the culture, either from a like not willing to do the work or just getting like frustrated or bitter or talking negatively about something. I think that would be the biggest detriment because I'm just so sensitive to it's still a small team. And if you've got somebody who doesn't fit, or that they can really disrupt the dynamic pretty quickly.
Right. So I know that you haven't have to deal with that yet with your own team to do firing, right?
Yeah.
So
not yet. Not
but
here.
I know you have done it before with your previous experience.
Lots.
So I want to ask you on that because I have a hard time.
Yeah.
Because especially as an entrepreneur, I feel like we always, especially just myself, I hire a lot with emotional connection because I feel like you work together so closely. As an entrepreneur, your team usually is pretty small. Right. So you usually like pretty tight. When you have to fire someone, it's like firing a friend, firing someone that, have their family depending on them, and then they depend on you, but you know that you just can't keep them anymore. Like, how do you deal with like that kind of emotion on a fire level?
Yeah. I always, one of the things that I often, as I present, and I used to say at work, at the bigger organizations too, is that like, there's the person and there's the job, and we care about the person and we want them to be happy and successful, but the job has to get done. And so I think even bringing that dynamic to the conversation is like, Joe, I want you to be here. I want you to be happy. And I want you to be productive, but here's the things that need to happen in this job. What are those expectations? And like, this is what needs to happen. And here's the gap. Like, here's where we are, and this needs to change. And if it doesn't change, then, I'm happy to provide you training. I'm happy to, help to a degree, but also like, I still have this job over here that I have to do. And so, but just having that honest conversation with the employee of like, here's what has to be done for the job. Here's where you are. How do we get you there? Like, what do you need for us to get there? And then, that's where you start kind of that first, second conversation. If it's not working, then it's like, so like, I wish you the best, but this is not sustainable. Like, I don't, especially as an entrepreneur, like I don't have money for two of the same positions. I can't just hire somebody else. And even if I could, it's not the right answer to have the underperformer, whether it's workload or behavior, like stay in the organization, because it's just going to frustrate the rest of your high performers. You and I've talked about, I have much less tolerance for negative behaviors, attitudes, like, get it together, get on board, or the door's over there. But I think separating that you care about the person and that the job has to get done is very key. And then ultimately having some structure around like those performance conversations, you know, having like what those expectations are, starting from the job description, which you wouldn't believe how many times I've talked to major top 5 healthcare systems, and the job that the person's hired in for is not what the person's ended up doing. And so there's a disconnect. So then, of course, the person's in the job, very frustrated, not performing the job well because it wasn't the job that they were told they were moving into. So make sure there's alignment there. And then have honest conversations. I think, you know, 30 days, you know, 3 months. I found that earlier, it's not comfortable, but I found that earlier I'm able to have that first conversation about something going wrong, the less I'm stressed about it. And the easier the subsequent conversations are, if that, so.
So as soon as you spot the problem, you literally have the conversation right away. Don't let it build up.
I mean, I can't say I do it every time. You should, you know, because I think sometimes we're trying to figure out like, did this just happen once or is it going to continue? But you don't want to wait until you're so frustrated that when you have the conversation that it's hard to stay neutral. So I think the more you can address it up front, the much better it's going to be.
I know that you're big on team building, right? You have field retreat. Like share with us some of the favorite like top maybe 2 like team building exercise that you do when you do team building.
Yeah. So one is I really like brainstorming, and you and I've talked about. I feel particularly in healthcare, but honestly, any leader of any business is like we take a lot on our shoulders and we feel like we've got to solve all the problems, you know, the whole like fake it till you make it. You've got to just know everything. And I don't think that's sustainable. And I think we're seeing that that's not sustainable on so many levels. And what I don't want is all the leaders to get burned out, because when they do, then we're, you know, it's just huge, you know, slippery slope for everyone else. And so I'm a huge proponent of having the team members engaged in solving problems. And part of that starts with being transparent and vulnerable as a leader and sharing what those problems and challenges are, so that your team members can actually see ways that they can help. But so I like using brainstorming. This can be simple, like Post-it notes, just getting the collective kind of intelligence from the group of, you know, what are the issues that we're having? So you can brainstorm on many different things, but, you know, like what are the issues that we're having? Okay, let's rank which 3 to 5 do we want to work on, like as our priorities this year, or perhaps talking around a specific issue. So for our practices, maybe it's patient satisfaction and patients are waiting in the clinics a long time. Like, how do we improve that? And so having a conversation around like, what can we do? Where are we seeing these problems happen? Or with hiring, I'm hearing a lot of organizations that, you know, the new employees aren't lasting that long, and they're leaving. And I think a lot of it's due to the onboarding and training processes. And so how can you improve the onboarding and training processes so the new employees feel supported, they're getting the tools they need, and they can get to that like high performance a whole lot faster. So whatever that is, but getting those ideas from your team, I think is really, really helpful. The other thing I have found very helpful in doing is I'm a John Maxwell certified DISC assessment trainer. So he has a DISC style assessment, and I have had kind of members of the team, like 15, 20, usually kind of want to segment the group and then maybe bring people together after, take their DISC style assessment. And not that I think any one personality assessment tells you everything about yourself, but I think this one it is a great start to talk, because it focuses a lot on communication. And it just sharing something like that with your team, where you can each share like, oh my gosh, this is something I'm really good at. I'm really strong at this. Or, you know, there's people who really like structure and process, but maybe a little slower to start projects because because they're wanting to get things done. There may be other people who are, you know, like more the influencing, like wanting things to happen, keep it moving, just more, you know.
Yeah.
And you can see like there's tension in the group a lot of times, like you see that throughout your work days. And so being able to have those conversations in a like open, non-threatening way is great, because then I can start to say like, okay, who's my best person for this type of work? And, you know, I don't really love this kind of work. I can be open about the fact that I don't like this. And I know you and I have done the Colby test too, which talks about like how you take action. And so being able to kind of match yourself up with somebody who's opposite from you can be really helpful. So there's a lot of things like that that I think can really be helpful in both improving communication and teamwork, but ultimately it's really like building that connection. And I think that's the biggest thing that comes from those activities.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. That definitely, I found that is true too. You know, like I feel like being a leader, which I still have a lot to learn myself, is really recognizing both our strengths and weaknesses, right? A lot of people don't want to talk about the weaknesses, but the funny thing is the weaknesses is what makes it real.
Right.
That's what makes it vulnerable, authenticate, able to communicate our weaknesses to our team and allow them to come with a solution to help us on the things that we're not good at. That's what makes the dynamic works really well. Last question I have for you is, you know, as an entrepreneur, everybody talk about time freedom and money freedom, right? Obviously, the business is the one that brings you the money. Right. And how important, now that you're an entrepreneur, in your personal level, how important do you say having like a team that you can rely on in order to free yourself up so you can live a life that you always wanted it?
Oh, it's so important, because otherwise I think it's very easy to get into, you know, I mean, there were many jobs in healthcare that I worked 70, 80-hour work weeks, sometimes more. And I love what I do for the most part. And it's easy to get down that path where you start just working. But what you realize very quickly as an entrepreneur, if you don't have a team, is that there's only so much time and only so much energy that you have. And so you're going to be tapped out pretty quickly in terms of you're not gonna be able to scale. And so you've got to have a team to be able to support you. And like for me, I think with most entrepreneurs, like come up with like a million ideas. It's really great for me to have like Kelsey, who's my business manager, like help actually have structure. She's very structured. And so to have somebody who can, you know, keep me on track, keep things moving, keep us focusing in the right direction is very important. And so you've got to have those team members to be able to think about both expanding your bandwidth, but also kind of counterbalancing where you're not as strong, which I think is maybe hard to admit. But once you start admitting that, you know what, I'm not great at everything, it becomes much easier. So, and your team will actually appreciate you more. Like those were my moments in my previous healthcare roles, where when I had those moments of like vulnerability and almost, you know, and sometimes almost like breaking down, like those were the moments where I actually felt the most supported and like higher levels of commitment from some of my other team members, because they were like, okay, we've got to regroup. We've got to like figure out how we get done what's important and let the other stuff go so we can help support each other. And so I think that's what's missing from a lot of organizations today is that like shared vision, openness and vulnerability. And you don't want to freak your employees out that, hey, we have no revenue coming in, I'm going to have to lay people off. Like, you don't want to do that, but you do want to say, you know what, hey, like things are a little slower. Like, how do we generate business, or how do we think about these types of, you know, activities, and say like, is it worth us doing this project over that project, given the revenue and the time it's going to take, or, you know, but being able to have that conversation those conversations are very important.
Yeah, love it. Thank you so much. What I'm hearing and learning from you today is, you know, like to hire someone, break it down to small step, right? So you can start hiring from step by step. You don't have to feel like you have to hire someone full-time out of the gate. Part-time is just as good sometimes. So feel free to hire the part-time person without like feeling the financial burden. And also a couple of things you keep sharing is, as a leader, it's extremely important to be able to share that responsibility of the vulnerability as well, that you don't have to figure out everything. That's what the team is for, right? Let them have a chance to step up and figure out things that we cannot figure out ourselves.
Well, and I think that's what, you know, I'm hearing from so many organizations that employees are leaving for sometimes $1, $2 more an hour kind of thing. But ultimately, you know, I think that often it's those employees, I think it's worth asking the question, are those employees really, do they understand the vision? Are they connected into like where you're trying to go? Do they understand what their role is in moving that forward? Like, do they understand, even if they're, you know, the janitor, they're cleaning, you know, or they're the front desk check-in person, like, do they understand their value of their role in what you're trying to do? And do they feel communicated with and recognized? Because like if those things are in place, then like a lot of the time, like even the small increases, I'm not saying people shouldn't be paid fairly, and the market should adjust as needed, but that's not going to mean as much if they're in a place that they feel connected and supported and valued. So
yeah, that's true. That's a huge piece, right? Money is one of the huge motivation, but it's not the only motivation for people to do a good job and want to serve your organization, because obviously the world is big, especially with like globalization right now. Everyone have choices, but why you is like a both way, right? It's both way things. So last thing before we go, and what would you say to someone that you have successfully transitioned yourself from a very successful big corporate healthcare executive to a very successful entrepreneur, to have your own business, have your own team? What would you say to those that on the fence to hire the first person, or on the fence to overcome their bad experience and start to hiring, delegate again? What would you say to those entrepreneurs?
I mean, I think look at why you're nervous about it, because I think there's probably some realness there. Is it a financial, you're nervous because of money? Are you nervous because you don't believe there's the right person out there, to which I would say you don't know until you look? Or are you just nervous? Are you nervous that you're not going to be a good enough delegator? And then I would say like start small. Like what is that, like your not to-do list? Like what are those things that you do that don't add value? Whether it's, sometimes it might be drafting an email. I'm a much better editor than I am initial creator. So having somebody like put some thoughts down that then I can edit, well, that saves me like stress, because and it also gets me a faster result for a client. I actually wish, even in my corporate healthcare roles, that I had really had like a virtual assistant, even if I paid for it on my own, to really help me not only with some of the work things, but some of the personal, making appointments and, life stuff that happens. So I think there's a real value in having assistants, even if it's 10 hours a week, to help you with those things. So I would say, look at why you're worried about hiring, and, put together, like, what are those top 8 to 10 things that you're doing that just don't really make sense for you to do, and see what's out there, because I think most likely there's someone out there that can help you with a large portion. And once you find someone, you build that trust, then I think it can just snowball from there. It is important to keep in mind, and since you're our structure and process guy, it is important to keep in mind that, you may have some turnover. So as you're training them on how to do something, think about how you can make it like a very quick cheat sheet, a checklist of what that person needs to do. Or you can create like a Loom or Zoom training video or something, so you have it for the next person, just in case, or if that person you hire gets promoted, you still have it. So put some structure in place along the way, so you don't get so frustrated if you do have turnover. But I think that really is great, and I wish I would have done it sooner.
Awesome. Great stuff. Having employee definitely is an investment. It's not expenses. That's what I think one of the biggest myth that entrepreneur and business owner think. Staff, employee is expensive, but really is not, right? Bill Gates has once said that the difference between his company versus everything else is because he recognized that Microsoft, the only reason Microsoft was Microsoft for a long, long time is because of the talented people that they have in staff. So your staff is actually your biggest asset of your company.
Absolutely.
So thank you so much, Adrienne. That's all we have today. If you ever want to have time freedom, for those who are watching, having a right person in your organization is pretty much key to have time freedom. Without that, it's gonna be super hard. So that's it. Thank you for watching. There you have it. Hiring the right people, put together the right team is extremely crucial if you ever want to free yourself up from a busy schedule so you can have time to live the life you always wanted. If you want to discover how to free yourself up without jeopardizing your current income, I would like to invite you to click the link below, register for my webinar, where I'm going to share with you 3 secrets on how you can free yourself up, work less, and make more. So click the link below, register for the webinar, and I'll see you there.